Hello and welcome to another episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. We are here at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel on a beautiful Wednesday, February 5th. We are live every Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time here on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel and also on Twitter. So make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube. Again, that's the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show. And obviously give me a follow on Twitter as well at BRamsey KSR. Also have a podcast that comes out every Monday and Friday. All my written work can be found on KentuckySportsRadio.com. And again, the best place to follow all of my basketball content is right here on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. So thank you all for tuning in. We'll let some people trickle in as we get going live here on a Wednesday afternoon. Unfortunately, the primary topic of today's conversation is going to be Kentucky's pretty tough loss down in Oxford last night, 98-84 at the hands of the Ole Miss Rebels. No secret that this one did not go well for Kentucky. We'll get into some of the big picture topics coming out of that contest. We will discuss the outlook for the Wildcats going forward, what they may or may not be able to do to improve some things, not just on the defensive end, but then even offensively, especially in the absence of a point guard, and what that means big picture-wise, certainly as the calendar now is here in February, March Madness looming right around the corner. We will get into all of that here on today's show, and also probably step inside the film room a little bit as well, so people seem to enjoy watching some of that on last week's episode, so we will hit on that again. But as always, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to jump into the chat, and I will answer those as we go along here live. I'm going to just take a look on Twitter, make sure we are live and we are rolling. So that is good, and we're getting some people in here. So again, please make sure to jump into the chat if you have any comments or questions as we get into what we want to talk about today. But again, Kentucky goes down to Oxford, Mississippi, loses to the Rebels 98, to 84. I've been pretty adamant over the last week or so that in the absence of a point guard, you have to essentially suspend all expectations. Now, that's about that's one of the worst things that you can say to a Kentucky fan within Big Blue Nation. That doesn't always go over well because there's a lot of folks that live by the mantra of this is Kentucky. We are Kentucky. The moment that you accept this, that, or the other is when we stop being Kentucky, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I think a lot of that stuff is foolish and probably a thought that no longer fits in college basketball. That might have worked in the 80s and 90s, but with NIL, with the transfer portal, with the parity of the game now, you're just not going to have this year-to-year dominance that you used to have. You used to roll out of bed in the morning and have 13 SEC wins. Now you have 13 SEC teams making the NCAA tournament. It's just a different ball game. Now, that's not saying that anybody is happy with it. Nobody's accepting anything. It's just a different world that we live in now. And then especially when you don't have Lamont Butler, when you don't have Kerr Kriisa, there's not a team in college basketball that's well equipped to operate without two point guards, especially a team that is already a little bit limited when it comes to playmaking. Now you take out arguably your two best playmakers. You go against some of these teams that really pressure the ball. Ole Miss is one of the best defensive teams in all of college basketball. It's obviously not going to go well. Now, again, is that me accepting a loss? Is that me saying, well, there's no reason to care about the games? No, obviously not. You still want to compete to win every game. You can still get frustrated when things don't go well. But I do think that if you're sitting here expecting things to just operate as if nothing has changed, then you're just being irrational as a fan because the facts and circumstances have changed. Lamont Butler, just a couple of weeks ago, again, it's just one person's opinion, but he was named a second-team mid-season All-American. That means that he was one of the 10 best players in college basketball. Now, do I really think he was one of the 10 best players? No, probably not. Most impactful? Maybe, because he's by far Kentucky's best defender. He was obviously the playmaker offensively that was able to handle pressure and do different things. I mean, we watched this guy score 33 points in a win over Louisville. We saw this guy be a big part of some of the biggest wins in college basketball this season. Imagine taking a second team off of All-American off of other teams. And a lot of people within Big Blue Nation be like, oh, well, sure, Marquette lost that game, but they didn't have Cam Jones. Or sure, Kansas lost that game, but they didn't have Hunter Dickinson. Guys like that is what the level of player that we're talking about here. But then within our own little group, you lose Lamont Butler, and it's like, well, I can't believe that we lost to Arkansas. Or I can't believe that we went and lost to a top 25 Ole Miss team. That's just silly. And I do think that going forward, you just have to, again, it's not about giving up on the season. It's not about not being upset when the team loses. It's about saying, okay, I thought we were a top 20 team. I thought we could make a second weekend of the NCAA tournament. I'm not going to think about that right now because I'm now cheering for a different team than I was cheering for 2 weeks ago. And that's what I sometimes and I get myself into trouble doing it because I get frustrated, you get frustrated, then we all end up yelling at each other when all we all want is just Kentucky to win the basketball games. But I try to get that point across to Big Blue Nation sometimes, and we're going to do it a little bit here today. Get to a couple of questions here. Comments basketball. Benny, my man over on Twitter, it's true. And when you get a win at Tennessee and everyone says, oh, we don't need a point guard. I think that's been really the case for this Kentucky team throughout the season. And I think something that hopefully in hindsight will at least give some credence to is that we all got really, really spoiled with some of our early season success. I think that Big Blue Nation, Kentucky fans across the country were as realistic going into this season as humanly possible. Certainly as realistic as any Kentucky fans probably have ever been, because a lot of people wanted a change. That change came. And then Coach Pope kind of hit home run after home run in the offseason, whether it was the press conference, whether it was building the roster, whether it was the early season wins, Duke, Gonzaga, different things. And I think we all, myself included, kind of fell into this trap of kind of thinking, oh, wow, maybe they're just better than what I thought. Like maybe these players are better than what I thought or what they were on paper as the whole continued to just be so much greater than the sum of the parts. Well, now I think that we almost didn't give Coach Pope and this team enough credit for some of those wins. Like this isn't a roster that really should be beating Duke, one of the best teams in college basketball. This isn't necessarily a roster that should have been able to put up 106 points and beat Florida. This isn't a roster that should have been able to go into Knoxville without a point guard and beat Tennessee. This isn't a roster that should have been able to go into Mississippi State and win, or beat a top 15 Texas A&M team. There's so many of these big wins that I feel like I'm forgetting one or two of them. But we probably didn't give enough credit in the moment of like how amazing those wins were for what this team actually is. So that allowed us, then we all very quickly changed our expectations for the season. And then now that we're getting maybe a little dose of reality along with bad injury luck, now all of a sudden things that probably should just be par for the course are feeling like a disappointment. And that is when you kind of become a victim of your own success early on, and we all kind of get wrapped up in the excitement of it along the way. Travis says fans are stuck in the past and they got mad at Cal for being stuck in the past. You probably just struck a nerve there with some Kentucky fans, Trav, but I think there's honestly quite a bit of truth to what you just said. So when you look at it going forward for this Kentucky team, there's a couple of thoughts that I have. It's, again, I think it's true unless you get Lamont Butler back, unless you get Kerr Kriisa back or some combination of the two, you have to sort of suspend any and all big picture takeaways, big picture expectations. Now, what I do think is important, especially in this SEC, and I've said this from the beginning, like you just have to take each game in a vacuum, get the wins where you can find them. This team, and nobody really wants to hear this right now because we're all down. Myself, like I've been as down on this team over the past 12 to 24 hours as I have been probably on Kentucky in a long time. I just think the outlook is relatively bleak based on what we watched last night. But still, the only real blemish on this Kentucky resume is Saturday's loss at home to Arkansas. All the other ones are still quad one losses. Does that mean that you should have lost all those games or that it's okay to lose all those games or whatever? No, not necessarily. But those losses just don't hurt you. Whatever you want to think about the name across the front of the jersey or the people get mad as we lost by Ohio State 20. Losing by 20, losing by 1, it makes minuscule difference. You can get mad because we lost to Georgia and Vanderbilt, but those teams are pretty darn good in the net, have some pretty strong resumes. They're going to be NCAA tournament teams. And they were on the road. Again, this isn't your grandfather's Vanderbilt and Georgia, or probably even your older brother's Vanderbilt or Georgia. So right now, this team went down and they laid an egg at Ole Miss. It looked really bad. Again, the magnitude means very, very little in the moment, or it means very little in the big moment. In the moment, it means nothing really in the big picture. This Kentucky team could have, at full strength, very possibly gone down to Oxford and lost to Ole Miss. Ole Miss is good. They're a top 25 team. They have a quad 3 game against South Carolina on Saturday at Rupp Arena. If you win on Saturday at home against South Carolina, this week pretty much went how it was kind of expected to go. Kentucky, especially due to the circumstances, Kentucky was not expected to win last night against Ole Miss. Even without Lamont Butler and Kirk Reese, they will be expected to win on Saturday against South Carolina. And most teams in the SEC, pretty much unless you're Auburn or maybe to some extent Alabama, going 1-1 week to week in the SEC, it's just not all that bad. And I'm not going to worry about the rest of the schedule until the South Carolina game happens. I know they're not very good, but you got to find the wins as they come. And if you can win on Saturday, then you just kind of you kick the can down the road a little bit further, just being able to say, hey, like, what are we all so upset about? The resume is fine. The resume is much more than fine. The resume is really good. Kentucky just lost the way they lost last night. I'm not saying Joe Lunardi is the end-all be-all, but generally it's pretty darn close to the reality. They're a 4 seed. I think they were like 15th on the sheet. Well, who wouldn't have? I mean, if you would have asked me on November 1st, hey Brandon, would you rather? Which of these two things would you rather do? Would you rather play out the first 22 games of the season and take the result, or would you rather be in the eyes of the NCAA tournament the 15th best team in the country on February 5th? I don't know about you. Probably would have just taken it and said, okay, let's sim the season to February 5th and let's take that. So again, as you sit here today, yeah, it's different because the point guards are out and you got to get healthy in these different things. But that's just that's what you worry about on Saturday. In between, you have some time to kind of step back and look at the big picture. Question everything says excellent as always, Brandon. Thank you very much for your support. Also says we need to try for a 9-9 record in the conference. Before the season, I wanted 11-7. That was fully healthy after beating Duke. All these teams, I wanted 11-7. Obviously, circumstances have changed. I now agree. I think 9-9 is not just realistic, but I would be happy with it. I mean, to harken back to the last point I just made, if you tell me, hey, you can either play out these next 9 games or you can just take 9-9, I'll be honest, barring, if you told me that Lamont Butler is going to be healthy, maybe I'd play it out. But if he's going to miss some more time, I'd probably just take 9-9. Travis says, such arrogance to think you should win 75% of games when the SEC with a new roster. It's disrespectful to the other SEC coaches. It honestly kind of is. I mean, again, you have to consider that this roster was built in 2 months in mid-April when you weren't even you obviously you had to completely punt on high school recruiting. You had no chance to get any high school recruits. And then you weren't even operating with all of the options from the transfer portal. Some guys had already made decisions. So, you're already skimming from the bottom a little bit. Certainly there were, plenty of big fish to go around, and Kentucky got a couple of them. But yeah, to think that what's happened to this point isn't overachieving, I think, is just a little silly. Baydollar on Twitter says, if we finish 5-13 in the league, mostly quad one, do we get in the tournament if we aren't healthy? Obviously not a tourney team right now. If we finish 5-13 in the league, so we are currently 4-5. If we win one more game, probably, no, because that means that probably that one win would be against like South Carolina. It's a quad 3 win. That doesn't really help you any. If you lose all of the other games, that means that you have a quad 2 loss. I think 2 more quad 2 losses, then one of them being at home to LSU. No, 5-13 in the league would not get Kentucky into the NCAA tournament, in my opinion. But honestly, it'd be really close because, as you said, there'd be so many quad 1 wins still. Eddie Congress says, I've been coping because I believed UK is a top 8 team based on demonstrated performance when healthy. Last night has me questioning that, and I doubt UK gets back to anywhere near 100% this year. Yeah, I think it's going to be really hard for them to operate at 100% because I don't think that it's very likely that Kirk Kriisa plays in another game. It seems like, and this is no scoop, this has all been out there, and certainly I'm never the one that knows anything that anybody else doesn't know. I only know what I read from Jack Pilgrim and people like that. But it seems like we are going to see Lamont Butler at some point this season, but it'll almost be on a trial basis of, okay, we're going to play, like, we've done what we can to get Lamont Butler in the best position to give it a go. He's going to give it a go, and then that's going to pretty much decide, does he play the rest of the year or does he not play again, based on how he bounces back from that, how it feels in a game situation, how he can take the bumps and bruises of playing in a big-time basketball game. So I think that the good news is, if I had to bet today, I'd bet a sizable amount of money that we see Lamont Butler on the court again. The bad news is that return is almost experimental for the big picture of what might come for him this season. Again, from Question Everything, hopefully Pope will have a serious talk with the guys and get them motivated. The defense is a huge concern. I do think that it is something that if you're looking at reasons to critique Coach Pope, one that admittedly has crept into my head, and I see it on Twitter, I see it on KS Board, the different things, like, there's a little bit of, is he too nice? Now, I think some of that is, can be silly. That there's ways to prove your point without screaming and yelling and cussing at people. That doesn't always have to be the way that you demonstrate your feelings. It doesn't even have to be the way that you critique people, or it doesn't even have to be the way that you get after people. But yes, I do think it's time that, that there needs to be a little bit of a come to Jesus meeting of, like, hey guys, our backs are against the wall here. We kind of need to try to figure this out and come together as a group. But it's also tough when, I've seen some people say that, this team isn't ready to play, or, Coach Pope needs to find a way to get these guys motivated. That might be true. I don't know. I'm not in the locker room. But I'll say this. Kentucky's a team made up largely of fifth-year seniors. Most of these guys have played 100-plus college basketball games. If the only way that they can get excited to play a college basketball game is by some rah-rah speech by the head coach, then we have problems well beyond anything else that we're going to talk about. If the reason why somebody doesn't play hard at number 25 Ole Miss is because Coach Pope didn't MF them before the game, then, like, what are we supposed to do with that? Like, that's on the players. That's not on Coach Pope at that point. Question Everything says, I look for Butler to give it a go for the Tennessee game. I hope so. Mr. Maven 22, I've got a bad feeling we're about to go on an Arkansas skid if Butler can't get healthy. It's certainly possible. So, like I said, most teams, especially if you have to play in the SEC. You're just not equipped to lose, arguably your best player, Lamont Butler, and then his backup in Kirk Risa. Most teams would go on a slide. So yes, I I'm afraid of that too. That there's not a single game the rest of this season that I feel good about as a Kentucky fan. Now, do I think we're going to lose all of them? No. But if you ask me, do I feel good about beating South Carolina on Saturday? Absolutely not. That's just the truth of it. Rich Ledford says, if defense is about, quote, lack of effort, how does Pope change their behavior? Seems like we keep hearing we have to dig down deeper. It's kind of like what I was just talking about, Rich. Like there comes a point, not that there isn't something that a coach can do, and not that it isn't a coach's job to motivate and pull some strings. But again, think about who we're playing in the games. Yesterday's starting lineup: Jackson Robinson, fifth-year senior; Kobe Brea, fifth-year senior; Otega Owe, a junior that's played high major basketball; Ainsley Olminar, fifth-year senior; Martin Williams, fifth-year senior. It's now, as Travis said, it's February 5th. We've played 22 games. Everybody that I just mentioned, well, Otega always played like 70 games. Everybody else has played like 125 college basketball games. If those guys can't get motivated, if they're not displaying effort, if they don't have a level of urgency today, we can run them until they puke. We can MF them in the locker room. We can take their lockers away. We can, stop eating at Jeff Ruby's and start eating at, Cookout for pregame meal. None of that stuff's going to matter. Like, they are who they are. They're either intrinsically motivated or they're not at this point. And I know people always inherently want like a reason. I mean, it's no different than like in your personal life. If you get fired from your job, you want to know like what did I do wrong? Or if you're going through a breakup, you want to know like, well, what was it that I did? And or if it's a basketball team, they want to know like, well, what is it that we can do to become the best team in the country? It's like, well, sometimes you're just not the best team in the country. Sometimes your defense stinks. And this is something I've said a lot. Just because what we're doing isn't working doesn't mean that it isn't the best option. And let me say that again. Just because what you're doing isn't working doesn't mean that it isn't the best option. Now, are we to the point in this season with 111th or 112th defensive efficiency in KenPom? Would I like to try some different things in a game? Yeah, probably. Like Kentucky played 5 or 6 possessions of zone, I think, against Ole Miss. Could we have doubled that? Maybe. I've not attended a practice this season. I'm going to essentially guarantee you that they have worked on multiple ball screen coverages in practice. I'm going to essentially guarantee you that they've worked on multiple different zones in practice. I'm going to about guarantee you that they've worked on pressing in practice. Therefore, I also am going to assume that there's a reason why we don't see more of that in the games. If Coach Pope thought, and fine, like if your argument is, well, I think Coach Pope was wrong, okay, that's fine. Like just because he's the basketball coach doesn't mean that he can't be wrong. At times, he would be the first one to say that. But I don't think, like, just because we don't see these things in the games doesn't mean that they aren't being experimented with. And like I said, just because what you're doing isn't working doesn't mean it's the best option. If we played 70 possessions of zone every game, we might be 150th instead of 112th in defensive efficiency. Therefore, I think we'd all be glad that we're playing man-to-man. Again, I'm not saying it's the answer. I'm not saying that what we're doing is right. I'm just saying that I really don't think that this staff is just married to the defensive plan and saying, hey, we're going to go down with the ship as we struggle to guard people. And again, just like Lamont Butler's kind of the engine of everything offensively, he's the engine of everything defensively too. So when you can't pressure the ball, when you can't get after people and make them run offense outside the scoring area, it can become really tough. Of course, everything's Brandon, your channel is growing. Yeah, I really appreciate it, everybody. This has been a lot of fun. Everybody jumping into the chat. We have over 350 live viewers right now. So that is awesome. And I appreciate you all. Again, please subscribe to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show here on YouTube and follow me on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. Eddie Congress, a loyal follower of this show, says, let's be honest, outside of Butler, this is a team of bad defenders. They try and play aggressive. They foul 50 times. They avoid fouling and then get carved up like last night. I do think that is a growing issue with this team. You went and got Lamont Butler, kind of a defense first point guard, and that's pretty much panned out as expected. You went and got Amari Williams, who at the time we kind of thought was a defense first center. He has not been as good as expected defensively. It's probably been like light years better offensively than we ever could have imagined. I mean, the dude had a triple-double last night. So you get a little bit of a give and a take there. I think for a while we thought Otega Oweh was a good defender. I think he can be a good defender. That's where retention is probably your best friend in terms of improving the defense. And I think Otega Oweh has that length, that athleticism, that physicality to be what Kentucky needs going forward. Now you just need to upgrade some of the other positions because let's face it, like Jackson Robinson, Kobe Brea, Andrew Carr, they don't have that combination of size, strength, and athleticism that Otega Oweh has, and those are some of the holes on the defensive side of the ball, especially when Amari Williams hasn't necessarily been the rim protector that we maybe expected. And Question Everything says it right. Let's face facts. We have mid-major players. That's, obviously, thanks, Trav. Thanks for being here. There's some truth to that. Steve Harp says, good show. Really like the game breakdown. Thank you, Steve, for being here. There is some truth to that. Like there is a reason why Amari Williams played 4 seasons at Drexel. There's a reason why Jackson Robinson was the 6th man of the year at BYU last year. There is a reason why Kobe Brea was still playing at Dayton. That hasn't magically changed overnight. And again, that's why I think that we became, and it's human nature. There's nothing we could have done about it. And it's kind of almost fun to do so. Like we kind of became prisoners of the moment, just as we are after losses. We were probably just as bad, if not worse, after wins, where we got so excited about beating Duke, about beating Gonzaga, about all these different wins, when we probably should have been telling ourselves, like, man, we're doing this with this roster? That is incredible. Instead, we kind of let the wins convince us that the team was something different than what we originally thought. And then now we're kind of suffering the consequences, so to speak, where we're getting brought back down to the level, probably that we should have been at all along. And honestly, probably about the level that a lot of us were at before the season. And that's the part that makes it hard. Zach says, how much more athletic are next year's recruits compared to this group? Jasper Johnson and Caden Lewis certainly are more athletic than a lot of the players. Now, neither one of them have a ton of size. Caden Lewis is a little bit smaller as a lead guard, though he does have some strength and explosiveness to him. He's also he's from inner city Washington, D.C. He's a tough dude. He ain't backing down from anybody. He's one of those guys where, and I mean this as a compliment, if it's me and you lined up across from each other, Caden Lewis thinks that he's winning that matchup 10 out of 10 times. It doesn't matter if he's going against Zakai Ziegler, Lamont Butler, or, Amon Thompson, or, the studs in the NBA. He thinks he's winning every matchup, and I do think that matters. Jasper Johnson has some of the length, has some of the innate athletic ability, needs to get in the weight room. Certainly, Malachi Moreno, probably a ways to go in terms of some of the physical tools, but he moves so fluidly for a 7-footer. That'll make up for some of the innate physical parts of Malachi's game. Rich says, when a steal and fast break happens, it looks like our guys allow the layup and we don't see an angry chase to get back. Maybe that's by design to not get a stupid foul. It could be, certainly. I really stop short a lot of times of questioning the effort. I think that's something that can be really hard to gauge for the average fan. I think it's something that we kind of use as a crutch because it's sort of an easy complaint, um, especially for people. This isn't, I'm not degrading anybody, but especially for people because it's not anybody else's job to know the basketball side of things. But like if you can't sit there and talk about like, well, we're getting scored on because we're having breakdowns in ball screen coverage, blah blah blah. Like most people can't do that. Most people can't dissect the X's and O's. So then it's easy to just say, well, they must not be playing hard. And again, that's sort of this innate human nature need for there always to be a reason. When sometimes the reason is without a point guard, Ole Miss is better at basketball than Kentucky is. Period. And again, I know people don't like to hear that. I know Big Blue Nation does not like to hear that, but I think there's a lot of truth to it. Nate Ament would be a great addition. I would love, love, love for him to be at Kentucky. Would have loved Caleb Wilson to be at Kentucky. I'm fine with him not being at Kentucky due to the circumstances of how that recruitment unfolded, because I've been pretty outspoken about not wanting to win bidding wars for players. But Caleb Wilson would have alleviated a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. There's not a better like 3/4 defender in that 2025 class, most likely, than Caleb Wilson. As long as our players play with effort, then I'm good with whatever happens. The injuries are significant, and not having Creasa all year to rub off on some of the players that had an impact, also, in my opinion. Completely agree. That's from me, Maven22. BBN. Oh, I like that. I like that neat username. BEEBEEINN. BBN. Love your content. Thanks, Brandon. Thank you, BBN. Caleb Wilson wanted to be the main man. I think there's probably some truth to that as well. And again, that's why I'm not losing sleep over losing him. I'm losing sleep over losing the talent. I'm not losing sleep over losing kind of the show that goes on around a prospect like that. Well, we've been going for over 30 minutes now. I have not gotten into the film room. I think we'll just save that for a different show. Really, really appreciate all the interaction that we had today. That makes doing this show much more fun and honestly just a lot easier. I don't have to talk just into the void as much. We're over 400 live viewers now, so really, really appreciate all of the newcomers to the show. Again, if you are new to the show, please leave a like here on YouTube or Twitter. If you're watching this in the future, you can still leave a comment and I'll get back with you. Please make sure you are subscribed here on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel. We will be doing these episodes every Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Since the live format is now kind of popping off a little bit, I would be open to doing more of these. So, let me know if you'd like some more live conversations, and I can maybe add one in periodically throughout the week so we can do this again and do this more often. But again, please make sure you are subscribed to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show. Thank you all for being here. Give me a follow on Twitter and TikTok, actually, at BRamseyKSR. And please have a great rest of your Wednesday. Thanks a lot for being here.